If you think about agriculture, it is creating something from the environment and turning it into energy that can be consumed. So to think about regenerative agriculture, you have to look at the whole cycle of the agriculture process from the farm, which includes them paying attention to soil health, animal health, farmer health, community health. But as that agriculture product continues down into the supply chain, we have to look at it in all lenses. So what is that truck driver doing to make sure that he's having as efficient of a route as possible, processing those agriculture products in regional ways so that we can reduce our footprint? And then at the processing plant, it's making sure we're looking at maintaining those nutrients in there and not diluting them out. And then as the agriculture product continues down to the consumer, ensuring that there's education for the consumers at the retail store so they know that it's regenerative, having it labeled there. So this is idea of regenerative agriculture that includes the whole agriculture supply chain, not just having the farmer be a part of it.
That's Hayley Painter from Painterland Sisters Organic Yogurt, and we're going to be talking to her in a few minutes. This is Down to Earth, the Planet to Plate podcast, a co-production of Radio Cafe and Quivira Coalition. I'm your host, Mary Charlotte Domandi. Before we get into our main show, we have a special feature for you. We're going to be talking to Michelle Nijhuis. She is a writer and contributing editor at High Country News, and High Country News is a sponsor of the Regenerate conference, so we wanted to introduce them to our listeners and thank them for their sponsorship. Michelle Nijhuis has been writing for High Country News for 25 years, and she's also author of the book Beloved Beasts, which I hope we talk about another time on this program. Welcome, Michelle, to Down to Earth.
Hi, Mary Charlotte. Thanks for having me.
So let's talk about High Country News. This is a magazine that's been around for over 50 years. Tell us what it is and how it got started.
That's right. It's older than me, but not by too much. It was founded in 1970 in Lander, Wyoming, by a rancher named Tom Bell. He was a rancher, a World War II vet, and a biology teacher who saw a lot of the oil and gas development that was happening in Wyoming at the time and realized that there was almost no national reporting happening. Very little of it was reaching coastal cities and the corridors of power, so that this destruction of the landscape, this basically unfettered oil and gas boom, was going on unnoticed by a lot of people in the U.S., even though these were lands that were really important, not only for habitat, but for recreation and beauty and all the kinds of things that humans value. So he started High Country News as a way to fill that gap in reporting. When High Country News started, we had a pretty tight focus on public lands. That's one of the things that makes the Western U.S. unique. But we have a broader remit where we cover really what I think of as the intersections of place, ecology, and people in the Western U.S. So if we really want to look at what's happening on the landscape and why, we have to also look at what's happening with people. We have to look at what's happening with climate change. We have to look at what's happening with urban development, and especially at the intersection of all of those things that are affecting the region we care about.
I think it's really interesting and important to talk about things that often get divided together, like conservation and ranching and public lands and private lands and habitat and politics. And I think High Country News is maybe unique in really doing that here in the West.
Well, unfortunately, what Tom Bell recognized is still to some extent true. There's not a lot of in-depth reporting on what's happening in the West. We've seen such a decline in local reporting, and it's still a big region with a lot going on. National newspapers are struggling too, and they don't have the resources they once did to send someone out or keep an office, open in Denver or in another regional population center and really get someone acquainted with the issues in the West. So I feel that High Country News still fills an important purpose and fills an important gap in looking at just how complicated these issues are. It's very easy to be in Washington, D.C. and think, oh, well, this wilderness bill or this change to the Endangered Species Act sounds fine. Let's support it. But we do our best to look at how those things play out on the ground.
Do you feel like High Country News has been influential in Washington, in state legislatures?
I hope so. We hear anecdotally that it is. We have a program where we send High Country News to all the congressional offices in the Western states. That's one of the reasons I really like writing for our audience, because there are so many practitioners in it. You know that when you write a story for High Country News, yes, readers are going to talk about it with each other, but there's a good chance that they're going to do more than talk about it, that they are in roles in their professional or personal lives where they can actually take those ideas and put them into practice in some form.
You edited a series called Conservation Beyond Boundaries, which is about conservation on, among other things, working lands. Tell us a little bit about that series.
Yeah, we started it a year ago. It's exciting to me because there is still a real dearth of nuanced conservation coverage in the media. Often what you see in national outlets, at least, is coverage of national parks, coverage of highly endangered species. And there's, of course, a lot more to conservation. I mean, if you think about conservation in the Aldo Leopoldian sense of developing a land ethic that really changes society, there's a lot more to meaningful conservation. So we're looking at the conservation stories that get ignored. It's more complicated than anyone would think. It would be nice if conservation was just about drawing boundaries around a few places and protecting them from direct impacts, but it's more complicated than that.
Well, and if you drew boundaries around a few pieces of land, then that would basically say everything else is up for exploitation, pollution, destruction, and bulldozing. And
exactly.
The whole point of this movement in many ways is changing the paradigm of conservation to being about conserving all the land around us. I mean, from highways with wildlife bridges over them to ranch lands to farmlands.
Right. Recognizing that conservation is possible almost everywhere, which is daunting because it means everybody has responsibility, right? But also exciting because it's not limited to these, very small, disconnected patchwork of lands. There's a lot that can be done, even, on lands that we think of as highly altered by humans. So, yeah, it's an essentially hopeful message.
You have a pretty diverse audience, as I think this podcast does too. I mean, we have farmers, ranchers, land managers, writers, conservationists, environmentalists, scientists, all these people. How do you write for and think about, as an editor, such a diverse audience?
That's a good question. And it's something I do think about a lot. And another reason why I like our audience is that we hear from them a lot. I've been a writer for many years, almost 25 years now, and I've written for a lot of national publications where you really do not hear nearly as much. You do not get direct correspondence from your readership like you do at High Country News, where they think of you as sort of an adjunct family member and they write to you and say, "What were you thinking?" So we have a lot of interaction with our audience, and I like to think that we pay them the respect of knowing that they are genuinely willing to hear things that might make them uncomfortable or they might disagree with. They're curious and they want to know what's going on in other parts of the region. They know the region is interconnected. They want to be surprised. They want to have a conversation with the magazine and with each other. So those things we know that they have in common, and we try our best in every story to speak to those things, while knowing that, yes, it's a diverse audience and there are going to be stories that some people skip over and some people read many times, but that's the nature of a magazine. And that's part of the work of trying to form and maintain some sense of a regional identity that's connected to the Western landscape, which is really, essentially what we've been up to for more than 50 years now.
Michelle Nijhuis is a contributing editor to High Country News, which you can find at hcn.org. And you can get a digital or a print subscription. Either way, it's a wonderful publication. Michelle, thanks for being with us.
Hey, thank you so much for having me, Mary Charlotte. It's a pleasure.
Quivira's fall field season is kicking off this month with offerings in person in New Mexico, Texas, Colorado, and over the web. Topics include mental health and stress management for food producers, soil health on rangelands, virtual fencing, and land art. And of course, the Regenerate Conference is happening in Denver in November. Check out the schedule at quiviracoalition.org/events and get yourself registered soon. You can also go to regenerateconference.com. And now to our program. I'm very happy now to welcome Hayley Painter. She and her sister Stephanie are co-founders and co-CEOs of Painterland Sisters, an organic yogurt brand coming from northern Pennsylvania. They are going to be speaking at the Regenerate Conference in Denver in November. Welcome to Down to Earth.
Thank you for having me. Just the name Down to Earth is something that I needed in this busy day I'm having. So thank you for having me.
Yeah. So tell us the story of your farm. This farm has been in your family for several generations, more than 80 years.
Yeah, we're fourth generation farmers, dairy farmers and crop farmers here in northern Pennsylvania. I have to put the image in your head. So northern Pennsylvania is what people would think of as Vermont. Rolling hills, big mountains, valleys, streams, a lot of running water, and cows grazing those mountainsides because there's nothing else that we can really put on top of those big mountains. We can't have humans living there. We can't grow corn. And so we have a lot of grazing cattle here in northern Pennsylvania. At least we used to, because they're very symbiotic and synergistic with the land. We grew up milking cows and feeding calves and hanging out with our family, which we then found out was actually considered work, probably more physical work than I'm even doing nowadays. And it's a beautiful way of life that is kind of disconnected from society and the day-to-day tasks that we do on the farm because it's something that is very wholesome and it's all together, right? So we grow the seeds and the crops grow and then we harvest them and we process them and we feed them to the cattle. And with the cattle, we utilize the milk and send it to the co-op, but then we raise the calves up and we're doing it with families. So it's kind of this complete circle that we have in a naive way of life, I suppose, in northern Pennsylvania.
One of the things that happened to you and happens to so many farmers is market instability, big differences from one year to the next and all kinds of instability. What does that look like? What has that looked like for you in the past? I know that 2019 and then in the pandemic, there was a lot of that. And that's actually what pushed you to start your yogurt brand.
Growing up on the farm, we didn't realize there were challenges. We didn't go to the grocery stores. We canned our food and ate what we grew in the summertime. We had the meat from the farm, and we all interacted that way. When you go to school as a dairy farmer's kid here in northern PA, dairy farmers don't make a lot of money, and I didn't realize that, right? It was just the life we grew up on. We were rich in other ways, like I said, fresh food and being able to interact with family. But as far as like going to elementary school and hanging out with other kids, we kind of smelled like poop. We never had new clothes. Like we didn't have Doritos in our lunch pail. That was like a novelty. Our family is very strong. Like they don't cry. They don't show sadness as much. Like you keep going and look at the positive and keep growing and going because as farmers, you get hit with a lot of challenges and you have to keep your head high. The first time I realized that our way of life was at risk, I came back, it was at elementary school. We saw our dad and grandpa sitting there and they were like upset. They were crying. They turned around, covered their face, turned back around, and they were fine, right? Because they put their appearance on. But what was happening was the milk was getting dumped down the drain because there wasn't a market for it at that time. So this happened for 6 weeks and we were worried we were going to have to sell the cows. The market stabilized and we were able to continue to go. As we got into high school, we experienced similar things. At times, the milk would have to get dumped on a day or two, or they just wouldn't come, or they'd say, hey, your milk price is dropping by 50%. Sorry. right? It's just the instability of farming, and that's the reality of it. It's not a contract that you sign up for that you're going to be guaranteed anything on some days, because we work with the environment and a perishable product and with animals. And so in 2019 was the last time we really had a really hard era. Stephanie and I went off to college, and we wanted to create a value-added product that could support our farm and other farms in our area. And we needed to make a dairy product that was large enough to do that. So we looked at cheese, we looked at yogurts, we looked at everything under the sun, and we were in development of actually launching a yogurt. We started planning in 2018, launched it in 2022. And we quickly started growing to hit the minimums as a goal to use all of our farm's milk eventually, so that someone couldn't just decide to pull the plug and make it so we'd lose our cows. So that's what we started, was Painterland Sisters organic skyr yogurt, and we had to grow at a large enough scale. And that's where we've been at.
So tell us about this yogurt. You call it skyr yogurt. It's now available in 50 states. It's available all over the country. What is it? How did you develop it? What sets it apart?
Yeah, so organic skyr yogurt is Icelandic style yogurt, meaning it's higher in protein, lower in sugar, and just really extra thick and creamy. It's kind of like a mousse, is what my grandma says. And it is different because it keeps all the nutrients in there. So our yogurt specifically has 4 cups of milk in it. Now imagine that. Like, look at your coffee cup. And now imagine 4 of those going into 1 single cup of yogurt. That's what keeps ours so nutrient dense, but also yummy. So it's good for you, it's good for your taste buds, and it's keeping all those nutrients from our farm and the other farms actually in the yogurt. And why it's different is a lot of other yogurts on the shelves, they're stripping the nutrients out. So you only get like a diluted amount of it. For instance, if you are buying the low-fat yogurt, they're taking the fat and selling it to an ice cream producer, most likely. They could be adding protein powders from other sources like plant-based.
They do that?
Yeah, isn't that crazy? Yeah, adding protein powders is very common, right? The trend right now is high protein. But the process for making a lot of the yogurt, they're actually straining out the protein, adding the protein powders, and that's where it's left really gritty in your mouth. So then the quality goes down, the taste. Or the taste is really good in yogurt, but it has so much sugar in it. Our yogurt has all the nutrients in there. It's got the highest protein naturally, with up to 21 grams in one of our yogurts. And the way that we make the yogurt, we take the milk, we pasteurize it, we culture it. When you culture it, it turns to yogurt. And then we send that cultured yogurt through basically filters with pressure behind it. So water comes out and it condenses that yogurt, cultured yogurt, into a more nutrient dense version of itself. So we're able to keep all of those nutrients intact.
So that is such an interesting thing, because we talk on this program, and a lot of people in this world of regenerative agriculture talk about nutrient density. So you've kind of explained how the nutrients stay in the yogurt. That doesn't necessarily happen with all the different kinds of yogurt. The question is, how does the consumer even know?
Exactly. There's not a way for them to know. There's not a certification out there. A lot of times people think nutrients just come from the way the food was raised. So right now the trend is to look for soil health. If you take care of the soil, you'll have more nutrients out of it. And you hear that a lot. And that is true, right? When you put good things into something, good things come out. But where we have to remember to look is also the processing plants. A lot of yogurts don't even have 1 full cup of milk in it. So if the standards are you have to maintain the nutrients that came from the farmers, and when it goes to the consumers, it has to stay intact throughout the processing method, it would allow that transparency and assurance that there's nutrient density in there.
So when you get feedback from your customers who are eating the yogurt, what do they tell you? Do they say, wow, this tastes extra thick and creamy? Like, what are you getting back?
Yeah, we like to say our yogurt is extra creamy, defiantly dreamy, but like grandma says, it tastes like mousse. Or if someone tells her they don't like yogurt, which you hear a lot, I hated yogurt personally. It made me sick when I got it on the store shelves. Like, it didn't taste good to me. And then I started making my own, and I'm like, wait, yogurt's not bad. So we wanted to make a yogurt that tastes good, that makes you feel good. So grandma will tell people like, I don't care if you don't like yogurt, try this. This is different because real nutrients taste good. You don't have to add a bunch of other stuff when you keep those yummy nutrients intact.
Let's talk about, you were talking about soil health, and that is an important part of your thinking. What does regeneration look like for you? What does regenerative agriculture mean on your farm?
Yeah, so regenerative agriculture, if you think about agriculture, it is getting food, fiber, and fuel from a producer, aka a farmer, a rancher, beekeeper, to the end consumer. So often we don't look at agriculture as that whole process. You need other things like sales and finance and distribution and all of these things. But in simple terms, agriculture is creating something from the environment and turning it into energy that can be consumed. So to think about regenerative agriculture, you have to look at the whole cycle of the agriculture process from the farm, which includes them paying attention to soil health, animal health, farmer health, community health. Some practices we utilize are rotational grazing. This interaction is symbiotic for all three of those positives, creating biodiversity and other animals and bees and pollinators, but it's also stimulating the ground and creating natural carbon sequestration through invigorating the soil because the cows are stepping on it, creating fertilization, and it's able to work together. It also helps the farmers because it's keeping those animals healthier. So that's a huge positive that we love. And as dairy farmers, having cows on pasture is like the best thing. Grass-fed is a huge trend. We fully love it, but an even bigger trend in our mind should be pasture raised and rotational grazing because it's really that interaction of the animals, the environment, and the farmers all together, creating a positive outcome. So that's one of the examples of regeneration that's really important on the farmer end of things. But as that agriculture product continues down into the supply chain, we have to look at it in all lenses. So what is that truck driver doing to make sure that he's having as efficient of a route as possible to reduce his energies, using and processing those agriculture products in regional ways so that we can reduce our footprint of where everything's traveling, which is reducing our energy. And then at the processing plant, it's making sure we're looking at maintaining those nutrients in there and not diluting them out. And then as the agriculture product continues down to the consumer, ensuring that there's education for the consumers at the retail store so they know that it's regenerative, having it labeled there, showcasing why it has more nutrients, because it most likely will be more expensive, appearingly per container, but per nutrient, it's most likely a little bit cheaper. So this is idea of regenerative agriculture that includes the whole agriculture supply chain, not just having the farmer be a part of it.
So you are in northern Pennsylvania, and it's not just your farm, but you're part of the community there. What does it look like for you guys in relationship to the farms, to the people, to the community around you?
So the local community in Pennsylvania, the farmers are going out of business at an alarming rate, especially the dairy farmers. And this is because we have a lot of small and medium scale dairy farmers. We're older dairy farmers as well. And so as the definition of sustainability has changed in our country, and it does change, it has actually directly affected farmers. So sustainability probably in the 90s and even before said that becoming most efficient, having the most amount of yield, more cows in one area, more outputs, so you can reduce the amount of inputs is the most sustainable because we're getting the most bang for our buck. So farmers heard that, listened, and acted accordingly. And now people are looking at those farmers as hurting the environment and not being sustainable, yet they transitioned to those options because before that was the definition of sustainable. Now the trendy definition of sustainable is like we're talking about with regenerative, having the cattle back on the land, all of the things that farmers were told wasn't sustainable back in the day. When new trends or new technology or new information comes out, which is going to continue, right? We're ever evolving as society. We have to make sure we're taking our farmers with us and that we don't put farmers out of business because of a trend or a new definition, or else we're not going to have farmers left to actually create this food and to steward the land and create regeneration in the soils and for our animals and for our nutrients that we're putting in our body. So the local community in Pennsylvania, the demand for agriculture shifted for larger agriculture. So our small, medium-scale dairy farms were no longer in demand for the supply chain. So we lost thousands of them in the 90s, and we're still losing it. And you can see the remnants of it. Barns are empty, communities are suffering, the local businesses are starting to struggle, the infrastructure, the different processing plants are going out of business. And we don't have any railroads up here. We used to have railroads to help bring the manufacturing that was in our area and bring the products to other parts of the country. Our area is struggling. It is an impoverished area. It's very desolate. A lot of my, friends from high school, you see them struggling to find work or wondering what we're going to do.
I mean, this brings up something that I think is really important. And in so many parts of the world, you have systems of small and medium farmers as well as large farms. If you look at like France, where every different region is known for certain foods or for certain kinds of cheese or certain kinds of wine or certain kinds of grapes or whatever. And we don't have that so much in the United States. Talk about the importance of having a system that contains small, medium, as well as large farms.
Yeah, diversity for our farms and diversity for our supply chain is really important because it provides stability. Just like anything else, you need diversity. Farmers and agriculture is the backbone of our society. If you have more small farms, you're able to connect more with the local and regional communities, which you need. But you also need large farms to connect products that maybe could only grow here in northern Pennsylvania, or for instance, chilies that are grown in New Mexico. You need some of those to be able to support everyone across our country as our population's growing. The problem is we focus so much on creating efficiency and yield. Now we need to work backwards and create diversity, not putting these large farms out of business, but supporting so there's more small and medium scale farms. And with that, more small and medium scale places for those farms to have outlets for their food and products they make, more processing plants at those different levels, more brands, more retail stores, grocery stores, everything like that. We need to have more diversity throughout our supply chain. And I think we see that as a society.
So you're talking about the importance of all this diversity, and here you are working within a system in which there are food producers and brands that are essentially monopolies or virtual monopolies or distributors who don't necessarily have the farmer's best interests in mind. They're retailers who want to get the best price and sell the most product. And so when you're talking about funneling that money back to the farmer, how do you do that? What are the incentives? Does it necessarily mean taking a little bit or lot of money away from the middlemen and redistributing it to the farmers in a fairer way? Or what does that look like to you?
I think it's like a game of dominoes, like each piece of the domino is equally important. And so when money moves and products move from the farmer to the consumer, we need to make sure it's at a viable level. So if the farmers say, hey, I have to sell our commodity product at this rate, we should be utilizing our universities and research centers to ensure that is the adequate rate and be able to give them that money for it. And then the rest of the industry is going to have a rippling effect to support that. So the farmers, a lot of times they're saying, hey, we can't sell that at a profitable rate. And you hear, okay, then diversify, create value added systems. Instead of just producing dairy products, produce crop and get into growing pork or chicken or other things. So for an example of a dairy farmer, if they say we have to charge this much to support the farmer, and the farmer is supporting the animals in the soil, which helps create regeneration, and then they can be empowered to add solar and wind and sustainable improvements as the new discoveries come out, they'll have more money in their pocket to do that and won't need as much government handouts to actually do those things. So how do you do that? So if the farmers say we need this amount of money, and then you look at the next stage, that means it has to go to the brand, and the brand has to pay that amount, and the brand is going to sell it to a distributor or a retailer, and the retailer and distributor have to work with that brand and make sure that there's healthy margins in each part of the supply chain. So when it goes to the retailer, we have to look at a healthy margin and not too healthy of a margin to make sure that it can advance to a consumer, but not gouging anywhere. And so when we say claims like, hey, food has a high inflation right now, that's a broad claim, right? By saying that, if you just look at food has an inflation, but you're not looking at each commodity product, maybe the yogurt on the shelves should have been increased because the farmers were struggling, but maybe something like the gummy bears are inflated and that needs to come down. So in some places on our grocery store shelves, prices do need to be raised so that we can actually offer nutrients in the products. That's why you don't see a lot of nutrients in yogurt products, is because the margins are so tight for brands that they sometimes can't possibly put more nutrients into that product because they can't sell it for a price that retailers will buy it for, and retailers can't offer a higher price because then consumers can't buy it. So we need education there. And that by having nutrient density as one of the key pillars of a regenerative system, and then education and promotion to say why this price is higher and here's what you're getting for it, and maybe even breaking it down that it's actually cheaper per nutrient, then we can actually create stimulation and healthy margin throughout the whole supply chain. If you look at a food brand, a startup food brand, think it's something like 98% of food brands go out of business. 98%. That's way above the national averages of businesses. Typically, it's 80% of businesses go under. This is 98%. And so brands, you don't have diversity there, which means you don't have diversity for farmers to sell their products to. And then you don't have diversity for consumers to buy those products. So we need to support creating diversity throughout the supply chain and infuse money and support in those areas to get them to healthy levels with margin and diversity levels. That's just one of the examples.
So that is what needs to happen. But like, how does that happen? Because of course the people who are making money, whether they're gouging or they're making a more than healthy profit or however you want to put it, they don't want to give up. Like, nobody wants to give up anything. So how does those changes come about? I mean, are you talking policy? Are you talking about different kinds of consumer demand, or what are you thinking?
It's going to take policy and support. It's going to take private businesses and support. We need more standards and regulation, but we also need more empowerment and encouragement. So say one of the larger companies, right? We're asking them to support startups so there can be more diversity in their line of work, showcasing that, supporting them with PR, giving them recognition for the work that they're doing to create and support this healthy industry. Like, each level, you can create plans to support that. When it comes from farmers, starting with ensuring that they have the right amount of funds there, and the same with those startup food brands that may need to take some policy and standards to start out there. Or instead of that, which is kind of like a controlling way, you empower them with finances to help kickstart them. So there's ways that you can either use regulation and standards, or you can use empowerment, grants, equity, and things like that, and have a plan for each.
Our guest in the previous podcast was Andre Loy, who is very vociferous about paying farmers who are doing regenerative agriculture for ecosystem services like carbon sequestration.
I agree. Those farmers are doing the work that sometimes other businesses are getting the credit for. It's fine if we have other businesses getting some of the credit for that because they're going out of their way to work with these farmers and pay them that. These farmers need to be recognized independently, whether it's on a certification that showcases that, and that can be marketing that the brand can then say, hey, my farmers, this many of them have credits for climate sequestration, right? So now that's a branding that I can, if I was a brand and I know my farmers have that, I can then turn around to the stores and show them that, and then they can show their consumers. So it can have a rippling effect if we help the farmers market and showcase all of the work they do, because they're doing way more than any of us know.
Right, right. Tell us a little bit about how you built your brand from that initial concept to becoming a national brand. And now that you're a national brand, what kind of voice does that give you?
Yeah, so I feel like it was very serendipitous to become a national company. We sold our first cup of yogurt March of 2022. And then within 4 months, we were national with Sprouts and Natural Grocers, and then quickly expanded from there. That opened us up with the national distribution logistics truck. So then we could connect with more stores and connect with more people. So now that people can buy our yogurt in every state and there's brand recognition, we get that credibility to be heard. Our mission is to connect consumers with farmers and farmers back to consumers. So having our yogurt in every state gives us credibility to actually make that connection, to show them videos of what's going on with the farm, to show them positive things, but also like, hey, they need help in different ways. And hey, our product has more nutrients. Like, check out more products that have nutrients. Here's some other brands. Like, we can tell them what regenerative means, especially with this movement and how there's different definitions for regenerative. By having a larger base, we can use our voice to really support farmers and share with consumers what's happening here.
You guys must be kind of amazing marketers too. I mean, you have this unique brand in the sense it's of two young, and if I may say so, adorable sisters, and you kind of like are maybe trading a little bit on the I mean, it's called Painterland Sisters yogurt, but did you get help? Like, how did you do that growing so quickly from 2022 on?
Yeah, I think first we found the need, right? Having the product that is the niche that people are looking for, they come back to buy it. But yeah, you're right. We love to tell our story. We love to be transparent, have that authenticity in a world where social media wants that. We're actually able to tell our story just by getting online and going to events and being who we are, right? Showcasing, like, we can go out in the backyard, take videos of the cows, upload it on social media, or send it to our retail partners so that they can show their consumers. And so we're able to bridge this gap in understanding. And it's a very powerful thing to do. And we're so lucky we're in this time era to be able to have that social media. But we just really believe in supporting communities, being farmers, right? That's what we do. We do a lot of talking as farmers. You do handshakes, you smile, but you also get involved with the community. And so we try to show up at community events. The first year we launched, we did 60 community events in Pennsylvania. And now we're doing community events across the country. We're going to county fairs, state fairs, nonprofit events. We're tying in with grazing events with farmers, but we're going to yoga retreats and rock climbing events. So we're really trying to meet our consumer where they are in person at the events they like to go to. And so it's a very farmer way of doing it, just getting involved and telling their story and smiling a lot. And honestly, we're just so fortunate that consumers and people eating the product are so receptive of it and to want to listen to what regenerative is. Like, now they're amped and ready to change the world with us. Like, the retail stores are too. The retail stores with this regenerative movement, it's like they're excited, especially because we're a farmer-owned brand. They have a huge part of it. And it's not like we look at the supply chain, we're like, we should take from here. Like, a lot of people think that. And it's like, no, there's not a villain really in the supply chain. We just need to help everyone in the supply chain see what's happening in the rest of it. And they're willing to work with us and they're excited about it. And so you can really see that with retailers. They're jumping on board. The big food brands, they're jumping on board. I think we just all need to work together and actually figure out what this definition of regenerative is.
This whole phenomenon of so many farmers, so many farms, closing and shutting down and leaving farming when they didn't necessarily want to. I mean, part of that is the children of farmers leaving. Do you think that those same children would stay if there were more stability and that kind of a more regenerative, sort of holistic, across the board kind of system?
I think so. I think it depends on what definition, again, of regenerative we're talking about. But if we're talking about regenerative system where we're looking at the health of the animals, the stewards, the environment, and society, then that would mean that we're providing financial freedom for these farmers to make choices as well. And when there's financial freedom, it allows the children of the farmers like ourselves to come back to the farm, have something to start their families with, to be a part of something greater than themselves. A lot of times the farmers can't afford to have their kids come back, or the kids grew up so dang poor. Why would they want to come back to something that financially is crazy, but the farmers are doing it because of pride and passion and love for the environment, soil, and animals, right? So giving them financial freedom will allow their kids to come back and for them to be better stewards of the land and to the animals and provide better nutrients to consumers, which is in entirety, the regenerative system is maintaining that nutrients throughout the whole thing so we can continue being better stewards and better consumers.
The whole question of what regenerative means, and you've already suggested that there are a lot of different definitions. What do you think is the role of labeling and certification in really ensuring a meaningful definition of regeneration?
I think I think that labeling and certifications will be a good thing so that consumers have something to rely on to showcase their values. I also think that the certifications and verifications that are out there still need an ear open to include more of the context and ensure that their certifications are actually going to help farmers, help animals, help society, and not just the soil, which is a key part of a regenerative system, is having a regenerative soil system. You can't have a regenerative soil system if, the farmers are struggling or we're not paying attention to the whole supply chain. And so a lot of the idea is by having a healthier soil, the farmers will have more financial freedom because they're working with nature and not having to bring a lot of extra things in. And I agree that is so, but I still think they're going to need even more financial freedom than just that, because we have to look at, again, food isn't just one product, it's so many different ones. And that might help, maybe a vegetable farmer, some different types of farmers. But I think we have to look at it as a whole and make sure when we're thinking about a regenerative system, it's not going to put farmers out of business. First of all, that's like my biggest thing, because they're the stewards of that soil. They're the stewards of those animals and of our food and the backbone of our country. So with these regenerative certifications, that's my biggest question. Is this going to put farmers out of business? And if so, what are we going to do to prevent that? And then I think we'll have something stable to really push forward. But I'm really hoping this is still a movement and opportunity for farmers to put their voice out there. Farmers are one of the highest depression and suicide rates in our country. That's a problem. Some of these farmers have been farming regeneratively for years. For their definitions, for some of the certifications definitions, some of these farmers are not having to change their farming methods very much, yet they still are under financial stress. So to me, we have to look at the whole picture and make sure that we're providing farmers enough financial freedom and that we're paying attention to animals and environment and society. Generative is about the whole thing. In the early 2000s, we focused so much on animal health. We weren't thinking about soil health. We weren't thinking about the farmers. We weren't thinking about nutrients in our food. So that was a trend. And that trend actually hurt farmers, it hurt consumers, and it hurt the soil because we were so into just animals. So it's this balancing act that really creates a regenerative system, and looking at that in a holistic viewpoint. I don't want regenerative to be a trend and only focus on one pillar of agriculture. It needs to have a rippling effect and make sure we're acknowledging a positive atmosphere for animals, stewards, society, and environment. And that's our definition of regenerative. And it should be something that continues to grow and expand as we learn new context about each pillar of regenerative agriculture.
Have you achieved what you wanted to do? I mean, you set out to save the family farm. You've done so. You're in 50 states. Are you in a position of stability? Are you able to have a consistent number of animals and milk them and put out a consistent number of products and make the money that you need to support the farm?
I'd say we're using like 2/3 of our farm's milk, so we still have to grow at a scale. And Painterland Sisters, like many startups, it takes a while to get profitable. You face investors and bank loans and opportunities that push you behind because, again, only 2% of startup food brands make it. And so it's this world of challenges that we're going through, and we're over the hurdle with most of it. We've gotten funded, we're into stores, we're producing more to support our farm and around 25 other farms. So we're at a point where we're going to keep growing and going. We kind of made it over some of those beginning hurdles. Now we want to use our voice to showcase some of these obstacles for other food brands and to share that with our state so that they can see opportunities that they can put in place to encourage more food brands to get started, to have more opportunities for processing plants and diversity in that level. And we want to showcase that so we can show what's happening and show that what we can do as a state to add more brands, add more processing plants, so there's more option for farmers. And we're really proud to be a part of Pennsylvania because they want to try, they want to support these organic regenerative farmers. They want to have this connection between farmers and consumers. So now that's our next goal, is to kind of get out what we learned to make it so there can be more people. So we're not quite where we want to be. And now our expectations are growing because we want to help even more farms. So our goal isn't completed yet until we really use the knowledge we learned and share it and create more diversity and more opportunity for food brands to start, right? And this connection and stimulation in our supply chain.
Hayley Painter is co-founder and co-CEO with her sister Stephanie of Painterland Sisters, an organic yogurt producer, Skyr Yogurt, and it is probably available near you if you are listening here in the United States. And you can find out more at painterlandsisters.com. Thank you so much for being with us on Down to Earth.
Thank you so much. I've appreciated the time.
You've been listening to Down to Earth. We would love it if you would support this program, which you can do by going to patreon.com/down-to-earth-planet-to-plate, where you can sign up for as little as $3. Patreon is Patreon. And also, please rate and review the podcast on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. The Quivira Coalition is a not-for-profit and a community network of ranchers, farmers, conservationists, scientists, educators, and many others dedicated to regenerative practices that produce healthy food, support meaningful livelihoods, sustain biodiversity, and remedy the impacts of climate change. To learn more about Quivira and how you can support their work, visit quiviracoalition.org, Quivira. And finally, this show is a production with the Radio Cafe. You can check out radiocafe.org to hear back episodes of this show and also find all kinds of other shows on a wide variety of topics as well. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.